Hello to everyone. I'm Dr. Victor Isbell. I teach management classes at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas, Nevada here. And today I'm here to talk to you about a technique that you can use to improve student mental health, while at the same time, we have found that it increases academic success among our students. You know, whenever I think of Florida, since this is taking place in Florida, I'm reminded that when I earned my PhD from the University of Florida up in Gainesville, one of my main teachers, Dr. James Wattenberger, who's the father of the community colleges in the United States, gave me two pieces of advice. He said, Isbell, you'll never be a good teacher until you have two things. You need to have white hair, and I think I'm there now. And white hair gives you credibility. You also need to have hemorrhoids, which gives you a look of concern. So I think after 48 years of teaching college, I've probably managed to get both of those things right. I've been teaching so long now that I think I know how most people are going to think, especially young college students. Let me give you an example and let me have you participate here. I'd like you to think of a number between 1 and 10. Any number you want, just choose a number. And I want you to take that number and in your head, or you can write it down, multiply that number by 9. So if you chose 2, it'd be 9 times 2, it's 18, okay? So now you're thinking of a new number, right? Now I want you to take the two numbers that you're thinking of, the two digits, like the 1 and the 8, and add them together. Whatever number you're thinking of after you've multiplied it times 9, add those two digits together. So now you have another new number. From that number, I would like you to subtract 5. Take away 5, and you'll have a different number, right? Now, with that new number that you're thinking about right now, I want you to relate it to the alphabet. If you're thinking of a 1, it's an A, a 2 is a B, a 3 is a C, and so on. So I want you to think of a letter in the alphabet now instead of a number. Now that you're thinking of a letter in the alphabet, think of a country over in Europe that starts with that letter if you can. And now that you're thinking of that country, I want you to go ahead one letter in the alphabet. If you're on A, go to B. If you're on B, go to C. Whatever letter you were thinking of, go to the next letter in the alphabet. Now, I'd like you to think of a big animal that starts with that new letter you're thinking about. Okay, now if I know how people think, and I think I do for the most part, I would guess that 90% of you are thinking about something, but it doesn't make sense to me because I did not know that they had elephants in Denmark. Well, hopefully most of you ended up with an elephant in Denmark by doing that. But knowing how students think helps us to understand them better. And I believe that it's a dangerous time to be a college student in America, at least. Not only does COVID-19 present its own set of physical problems, but the associated isolation and loneliness and depression has created major physical health and mental health issues among students. Students living away from the first time have less access to their family and friends. Homesickness can increase the feelings of isolation. So along with more freedom and more independence, a lot of students face increased academic standards as they're trying to adjust to a new environment, and they have opportunities to experiment with alcohol and other drugs, all which may compound the problems of stress and depression and the risk for suicide. Several studies have indicated that the pandemic has significantly worsened students' mental health. So there's a pattern here. Stress leads to depression, tends to lead to overdoses, tends to lead to suicide. Stress in America costs American businesses about $500 million a year. 75% of all the visits to primary care doctors are stress related, and 40% of all the turnover can be attributed to stress. So let me review just a couple of other statistics with you. The CDC's National Center for Health Statistics estimated there was 103,306 drug overdose deaths in the United States in the 12-month period of 2021. 100,306 deaths. In the total war in Vietnam, which we fought for many, many years, there were 47,434 deaths. In 20 years of Afghanistan, there were 2,401 deaths. So overdose deaths is a major problem in America. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid typically used to treat patients with chronic severe pain following surgery. It's a substitute very similar to morphine, but it's about 100 times more potent. Under the correct supervision, it's a great medicine to have around, but just 2 milligrams of fentanyl can be lethal depending on your body size and tolerance and past usage. The DEA estimates that 42% of all the pills that they've checked have had at least 2 milligrams of fentanyl, which it can be deadly. Drug trafficking organizations typically distribute fentanyl by the kilogram. That's about 2.2 pounds. 1 kilogram of fentanyl is enough poison to kill over 500,000 people. Perhaps you saw in Florida here a couple weeks ago, they had spring break, and there were students down there from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. 4 of them took some fentanyl. They actually thought they were taking a different drug. It was cocaine laced with fentanyl, and they had cardiac arrest. Then the 2 people that tried to help them by doing CPR, they also were poisoned by fentanyl. It's an epidemic in our country, and especially among young college students. As bad as it is to have these unintentional deaths by drugs, the more disturbing problem we have in America today is suicide. Of more than 67,000 college students in over 100 universities that participated in a study published in Depression and Anxiety Journal, 1 in 5, or about 20% of them, thought of committing suicide. 9% had attempted to commit suicide, and 20% reported some form of self-injury. In America today, we have about 4,000 college students that attempt suicide each year, and about 1,100 of them succeed in their attempt. Yeah, this is an area of particular interest to colleges because suicide is the second leading cause of death for U.S. teenagers and for young adults. So with the COVID-19 pandemic making depression and thoughts of suicide worse, a lot of universities have had to institute some strategy over the past year and a half to combat this. Well, how does all this involve a classroom teacher? Well, the university's instructors are expected to provide a rigorous academic experience. I believe we also have a responsibility to address the mental and emotional and physical and spiritual health issues of the environment in which we find ourselves. I want to describe for you a well-researched applied process, which if you follow it in almost any subject, it will increase the positive mental and emotional health of students. At the same time, it can significantly improve academic outcome. This method of teaching does not take time out of your class, does not take class time. It's a method of homework that allows you to evaluate the quality of the student thinking and make sure that they are doing their work. So how does it work? Well, according to Shawn Achor, a researcher at Harvard University, research has shown that only 25% of job success is predicted by IQ. The other 75% can be predicted by the optimism level and the social support, which allows students to see stress as a challenge rather than as a threat. When the brain is working in a positive mode, it performs much better than if it is working at negative, neutral, or stressed. A positive brain is 31% more productive. Salespeople are 37% better at sales, and doctors are 19% faster and more accurate in coming up with a correct diagnosis. So we need to find ways to train the brain to be more positive, just like we train the body to be stronger. Positive psychology, a newer branch of psychology, strives to help us understand how we can be happier and more optimistic and more resilient. There's overwhelming evidence from research that people who are happy are more successful. Success doesn't lead to happiness. Happiness leads to success. Positive people perform better because they're more motivated and more effective. A Mayo Clinic study found that optimists were 50% less likely to die early compared to pessimists. Research say it's because negative emotions trigger the production of the stress hormone cortisol, which crushes our immune system. So the teaching strategy I want to describe here is designed to rewire the brain, and it's usually called reflective journaling. This is not really a new concept. Critical reflective journaling has been used to facilitate student learning in a lot of disciplines. It can facilitate critical thinking and help with student learning outcomes. It's not simply a recounting of the day's event. It's not a diary, but it's a learning exercise where students express in writing their understanding of and reactions to what has been read or covered in a lecture or viewed through a PowerPoint. The end result of this process is a steadily growing document that records the progress of their learning. It can be kept for any course. The ultimate goal is actually to change students' attitudes by having them critically reflect on their beliefs and what they have learned, and then help them to implement a plan to improve positive mental attitude. The strength of reflective journaling is that it highlights students' thoughts and perceptions about course content. It's really a reflection of the reflections and perceptions that they have had, which increases student interest and encourages further investigation. So, how does it work? There's usually 5 steps that we follow. The first one is I require students to list at least 3 things every week for which they are grateful. They have to add a sentence as to why they are grateful for the items listed. They first start out by listing things they are grateful for, usually material things, and after a while, they start listing people that they are grateful to. Maybe a teacher that helped them, maybe a grandparent that gave them some good advice. But they add 3 new items each week that they're grateful for. The second thing I ask students to do is to do an act of kindness each week and write about that experience in their journal. Being kind boosts serotonin and dopamine in the brain. These are neurotransmitters that give you a feeling of satisfaction and well-being, and it causes the pleasure reward center in the brain to really light right up. Endorphins, which are your body's natural painkillers, can also be released. Being kind causes elevated levels of dopamine in the brain. That's how we get a natural high. Sometimes you hear people talk about having a runner's high, and it also increases a hormone in the brain, which produces the release of nitric oxide in blood vessels. That dilates blood vessels and reduces blood pressure in our body. According to Dr. Richie Davidson of the University of Wisconsin, kindness is teachable. It's kind of like weight training. People can actually build up their compassion muscle and respond to other people that are suffering, and they can show care and a desire to help. It's also contagious. The positive effects of kindness are experienced in the brain of everyone witnessing the act. It improves their mood and makes them more likely to pay it forward. This means that one good deed in a crowded area can create a domino effect and help a lot of other people that are around. So when students couldn't think of a random act of kindness to do for some week, a lot of them would get in line at a fast food drive-in and pay for the car behind them. This happened to me a while back at a place called In-N-Out Burger. It's a hamburger chain here in the western part of the United States. And my wife and I were getting a hamburger and 1 order of fries. It was about $8. And when we got to the window to pay, I gave the girl my card and she said, "Oh, the people in front of you already paid for it." Oh, my wife was so excited. She said, "Now you've got to pay for the car in back of us. Kindness is contagious." I said, "Okay, charge me for the people behind us." And of course, I look in my rearview mirror to see that it was a family back there with a mother and a father and a whole bunch of kids. I think my bill was $44. I ended up paying for their meal. However, last week we went to In-N-Out again, and as we got up to the drive-thru, I said to my wife, "Should we pay for the car behind us?" She was so excited. She thought that was such a great idea of me to be that nice. Of course, I had looked in the rearview mirror and there wasn't a car behind us, so I still got credit for the thought. Well, following the gratitude items and acts of kindness, a reflective journal should contain 3 things that I want to call the mindset, meditation, and movement. Mindset is something that you learn through self-reflection exercises that aid students to get clarity on their strengths and their weaknesses and their career directions and their choices. It's increasingly popular for treating depression, anxiety, and other mental health conditions. A lot of publishers provide self-assessments where students can see how they compare to other students on a wide variety of topics. Then, depending on the class, students will be asked to summarize in a few paragraphs the takeaways, the aha moments that they get when they are reading their textbook or from class lectures or from PowerPoints or for videos. They have to write this down. You know, when elementary students get home from school, the first question their parents ask is, "Well, what'd you learn today?" And normally the students say, "Oh, we didn't learn anything," because they haven't reviewed what they learned for that day. By having college students reflect in writing about what the concepts were taught and list any aha moments they had, the information that is presented is reinforced and it is retained better in long-term memory. As a result, the students tend to do significantly better in academic exams compared to the students that don't have to write this down and summarize what they have learned for the day. The other 2 things that I encourage, I don't make them write it down, but one of them is called meditation. Meditation is sitting back and thinking about things in your mind a little bit. The conscious moments of meditation might be considered prayer, and it allows the brain to focus on tasks that you have to do as you meditate. The last area would be movement or exercise. Many college students spend way too much screen time and don't get out and get in the sunshine enough, and I encourage them to do that. Well, the end result of all of this reflective journal is to gain what I'm going to call a happiness advantage. In a company, there is superior productivity, more resilient people, less turnover, less burnout, and greater sales. I teach about 500 students a semester. I found that my students academically perform about 10% better or higher on the exams and projects when they're doing a journal than when that journal isn't required. So attitude is everything. I hope that if you teach a class, especially if it's an on-class class, I hope you'll give this a try. I think you'll be impressed with the results that you will see by requiring a reflective journal from your students in your class. Hey, thank you for your time today. I hope everyone has a really great day. Bye now.